So welcome everybody to this next session. It's a student engagement and experience panel discussion. It's something I've been particularly looking forward to this morning. And I think we've been signposting it along the way, and hopefully it's going to be an opportunity for us to touch on some of the themes that have been popping up throughout the morning so far. I'm particularly interested in this idea of building student communities and also student confidence and assessment. So I think those are things that I'm hearing, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about here. Can I encourage you all to use the chat if you want to interact with us, because not only are we going to be discussing student engagement, it'd be great if we could be engaging with you. So please do use the chat and the Q&A, and I'll keep my eye on that as we go through this session, and we'll bring you in your comments in as appropriate. So to get started, can I just ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves and maybe tell us about the perspective that you're going to bring to this discussion today. So I'm going to just start off on the top left of my screen. I've got Andrew Wilson.
Yes, hi, thanks Claire. My name's Andrew. I work for Northumbria University as a TEL analyst as part of the content team. So I work closely with academics to help them develop materials, online materials, engaging materials, let's say, to try and bolster that student engagement and assessment. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a perspective from that angle.
Thank you, Andrew. And next I have Alan Duddy.
Hi everyone, my name's Alan Duddy. I'm a Global Education Manager with Vevox. We obviously supply student polling solutions, but I've been involved in that side of things for around 17 years or so. So I'm really excited to be involved in today's session and start chatting with you all.
Welcome, Alan. Next I have Lucian.
Morning all, thank you Claire. So my name is Lucian Tippy. I'm head of teaching and learning enhancement in the College of Business Technology and Engineering, Sheffield Hallam University. My role is to look after about 400 plus academics and make sure that we do the best we can by our students. In other words, provide the best teaching experience, provide the best learning environment for them, and help them to be as successful as they can be with their assessment. So I guess what I hope to bring to the table today is that a very broad and extensive practitioner's view. I work with many of my academic colleagues directly on a day-to-day basis, and I hope to bring those kind of views in here.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Ian.
Hi, yes, thank you. Ian Whitehead. I'm the academic head of online learning at the University of Derby. I'm also Professor of Modern History there as well. So perspectives I've been very closely involved in the group at the centre of the university that's been orchestrating our response to the pandemic and driving forward kind of innovation in terms of learning and teaching and digital learning strategies. Obviously, my experience of heading up the online area within the university, and then my own just personal experience. I do continue to teach on the history programme at Derby, so my own experience of delivering in this environment.
Thanks, Ian. And I'm sorry, Kevin, because I nearly forgot you. I was distracted by the fire. So, Kevin, would you like to tell us about your perspective that you've...
Yeah, I thought you'd forgotten about me, Claire. Yeah, no problem. So, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Kevin Merry. I'm the Head of Academic Development and an Associate Professor in Learning and Teaching at De Montfort University. So, my main area of interest and expertise, really, is in universal design for learning. So one of the core principles of universal design for learning is student engagement and finding flexible ways to actually develop that level of engagement. So I'm hopefully going to provide that UDL perspective on the discussion that we have today. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I think we've had a bit of a conversation up till now today about formative assessment. And so I'd really like for us to kick off this conversation by asking you about what you think the role of formative assessment is in terms of engaging students, especially online, and what platforms or approaches that we might use to try and use formative assessment to do that. So maybe Lucian, can we start with you?
Sure. So traditionally, we've come from an environment where our academics have used extensively summative assessments to make sure students engage with teaching and learning. So we were in a situation where perhaps we had 10, 15, or even 20, as many as 20 summative assessment tasks in a module. Now that is, we've decided an overkill, and our students have told us as much. We have initiated a range of projects in our college and our departments where we have reduced considerably summative assessment. Typically, you will find 2 or 3 per module now. And we have found that that gap needs filling if we want our students to be as successful as we want them to be by formative activities. Now, people tend to jump very quickly into the discussion around formative assessment. Now, we believe there's more to formative activity than just assessment. You have to allow students to build themselves up towards being able to take on formative assessment. And you do that through your day-to-day classroom activity, in your seminars, in your workshops, through the exercises, through the problem-solving activity that you put on. That builds them up to be ready to take on the formative assessments. And there's a great many academics out there who will say, well, if it's formative, they will not engage. Well, you have to make it very clear to your students what is the relationship between your formative assessment activity and summative assessment. How does taking on a piece of formative assessment builds them up and allows them to be very successful in their summative assessment activity? So for me, creating that link between formative activity and the summative assessment that they're all very interested in, they all want to do well, they won't all want to achieve in, is the key to the success of this activity.
Great, and maybe from a practitioner point of view, then Andrew and Ian, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. So maybe take Andrew first.
Hi, yeah, I think obviously, like I say, I work with academics to help them, you know, in the work that they do, and I think formative assessment, from my point of view, is it works best in very small bits. Very, you know, the BBC, you know, they have bite size, don't they? You know, it's that. Obviously, in the classroom, you can assess people's learning, you know, by visual clues, etc. We've moved into this online, you know, hybrid world now, and yet we still need to check that, you know, you're not losing people. So I think just very, like I say, a lot of the work I do is almost just these very quick knowledge check elements, you know, quizzes or little scenario based exercises, you know, which, like you say, they're just building up that ongoing learning to, you know, it allows the student to go, oh, actually, I did understand that, great. Or it then gives the academic data to go, I'm losing this, you know, this person, I can then intervene. And, you know, and again, you can identify trends as well with that data. Is the pace too fast? Is it too slow? You know, so I think formative assessments is very, very key, especially going forward in our hybrid, high flex world.
Yeah, I think that role of scaffolding is really, really important, isn't it? And I think we've really experienced what happens when students get lost or it doesn't make sense to them in that world, but also how valuable that feedback and that information is for us as you know, people who are responsible for teaching and learning, as well as for the students who are undergoing it. Ian, can I bring you in here?
Yeah, certainly. I think for our online learners in particular, that is on the programs that are designed as an online program from the outset. It's really important, I think, to have those formative elements in there, because they help to create the engagement with the learning, because often they're much more in an asynchronous environment than our campus students are. So they really need those kind of things that give a sense of interaction with the learning materials, and things like end of unit quizzes and so on are a really key part of that. Very similar to what Lucian was saying, though, for our campus students. For several years now, the University of Derby has had a strategy of having fewer summative assessments and actually building in formative assessments into the formal approval of programs when we design them. And I think really making sure that those formative learning activities are building confidence, building skills, giving those early points of feedback and sense of engagement with the learning activity. And as much as possible, trying to make them an activity that feeds into the summative assessment in some way, so that students also see the value. It doesn't just become another task that you're making them do, but it does actually link through. And again, certainly on campus, I've found students have really taken to in-class quizzes as ways of breaking up the session. They're risk-free ways of giving an opinion on things for people who might be a little bit shy about making contributions to start within a debate environment. And my own history students seem to love Kahoot for some reason, so they themselves also start to incorporate that into their own presentations when they're trying to build engagement with their colleagues when they're leading the class sessions as well. And then something I found that did work, and I've continued with students since, is that just the old-fashioned discussion boards didn't used to get used very much by students on the VLE prior to the pandemic, and actually they did start to engage with them more when we were moving into the remote learning. And I've found a lot of them come to value that as a tool of actually testing their ideas before class, building confidence in what their likely contributions are, and that has led to, I think, some students who otherwise might have sat back to be bolder in those class discussions. And then obviously things like a Padlet as well have been a good way in which kind of we've been able to set kind of pre-class activities, some feedback given on that, and then the students bring that into the classroom. So it's not always just about assessment, but it's also about how you're building that in module engagement and development, and that kind of scaffolding that you mentioned a moment ago, really, Claire.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned freedom to fail there sort of inadvertently, and I think formative assessment plays a really important role in building student confidence, but also giving them a safe space where they can fail before and learn, because that's where the learning happens, isn't it, before they go on and they do those summative assessments. But also I'm quite interested to hear is how we tend to be using formative assessments as a way of giving students an opportunity to engage with each other and engage with their learning, and it's an opportunity for feedback, isn't it? And it's really key for that. From the universal design for learning perspective, Kevin, are there things that we have to be most mindful of in the designing of our formative assessments for this space, or anything else that you would like to add to the discussion?
Well, I think formative assessment is a fantastic opportunity, really, to demonstrate the level of flexibility that universal design for learning espouses. Because formative assessments tend to be low stakes as opposed to high stakes, it provides us with the outlet to be as flexible as we want to be. So on our postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education, which I was program lead for a number of years, we had a patchwork style assessment. So the participants had to complete a formative patch of assessment pretty much on a weekly basis, that helped them to complete the overall summative assessment at the end of a given module. But we said that they could complete that formative patch in whatever format they wanted. So whatever met their preferences, their needs and their interests. If they wanted to write it, they could write it. If they wanted to create a screencast or a podcast, they could do that. If they wanted to create a poster, they could do that as well. So the nice thing about formative assessment is it enables us really to sort of release the shackles a little bit in relation to the types of assessment methodology that we impose, which can be quite restrictive sometimes in a summative scenario, depending on the subject discipline. Sometimes we get professional, regulatory and statutory bodies that stipulate how we should assess students in given areas. The nice thing about formative assessment from a UDL perspective is that it gives us that level of flexibility to allow the students to really express and demonstrate their understanding in ways that meet their preferences and needs. And ultimately, it enables them to remove any potential barriers from that assessment process, which ultimately, I believe, supports their engagement.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I'm also thinking about the platforms that we use as well. So there's something about the design of the experience from the learning and teaching point of view, but also from the tools point of view. And I think maybe some people listening to this discussion might be interested to hear about some things that we can be using, some tools that we might be able to use to support that feedback and that formative assessment. So I think, Alan, I'll come to you first, but then maybe afterwards to Andrew to maybe talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Obviously, formative assessment, is there to help students identify their strengths and weaknesses and, target those areas that essentially they need to know, they need to work on. I think Generation Z, is at university now, and, they crave positive reinforcement more than ever. So, that's one side, reinforcing their strengths. They enjoy that. They want to hear that, and the different mediums that they can, accept that positive reinforcement from is really key. I think it was Peter Bryant at University of Sydney commented, working with vendors to customize how you use their products means that the educational approach is designed by and for the students. And that's really key, that student voice building into how they want to hear that positive feedback. But equally, on the flip side, Claire, a solution like Vevox, of course, can do all of that, as other polling solutions can do. But there's also this Q&A board built in there. So the likes of picking up on Ian's point about the classroom discussions, you can leave that open between week 3 and week 4, and the class can build out that discussion themselves. So, actually reinforcing those knowledge gaps and inter-peer learning is absolutely key themselves. Yes, they're there to learn from the professors and the lecturers, but equally, if that medium is universal and they can all jump on it and leave that open between teaching weeks, they can certainly address those knowledge gaps themselves, as well as the reinforcement from the professors and lecturers at the same time.
Great. And Andrew, do you think you have anything from a sort of design and technology perspective to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ian's already mentioned, tools out there, sort of Kahoot and Padlet, and obviously voting systems. I mean, we're in a world where the world into the mobile phones, and we had a chat beforehand where you actually, you ask them to log in and do something, but are they actually just on Facebook? So there's almost that issue to get around. I think for me, I mean, there's all these tools out there, but they all cost money, and that's half the problem I've always encountered in my education life. We can't buy every tool out there, so it's almost working with what we have. For myself, I'm currently working on a project utilizing Power Automate within. I'm sure we've all got Office within our institutions now. You've got that Power Automate facility where you can create this automated feedback through a quiz, but then you can personalize it as well. And I think that's where we are going. It's just, if it's only very small personalization, it's giving that student a bit more value, which again, we're in this world now where they're paying their tuition fees, and they're demanding almost that where's my 2-1 or whatever, without and they don't quite understand that they actually have to put some work in. So if we can personalize it and add a bit more value through that, then I think that's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, I've heard a really good analogy about buying a gym membership. So just buying a gym membership doesn't make you fit. You have to go and use the gym. And I think it's very similar, isn't it? You don't just enter your learning platform and suddenly absorb an entire degree's worth of information and skills and knowledge. But I think this thing about personalization is really interesting, isn't it? And this idea of making sure that students are involved in the design process and get what they need from these experiences. This idea of meeting students where they're at rather than where we necessarily are. I think that's quite an important aspect of engagement in general, in the theory of student engagement. But I'm wondering if anybody's got any perspectives they can share in terms of how we might engage students in the design and personalize it a bit for them. Lucian?
For sure, Claire. And I talked not long ago about staff-student partnerships, and we're great believers of that at Sheffield Hallam. And for a couple of years now, we've launched university-wide a number of funded enhancement projects where, of course, the object of the enhancement is either aspects of your teaching or your learning or the wider student experience in a particular area. But a condition of the funding is aimed, of course, at our academic colleagues, but the condition of the funding is that a certain percentage, significant percentage sometimes, of the funding is used to employ students as partners to develop aspects of the curriculum, or indeed to develop aspects of the broader student experience, be that employability related, be that student administration related, or something like that. Now, we found, and we ran a conference with all of these project leads presenting their work in September this year. What we found is that the quality of the development work that takes place when staff and student partnership is involved is significantly better than just when academics. Now, and these are experienced academics sometimes we're talking about that have been in the profession for 10, 15, 20 years maybe. It makes no difference. The moment they engage students in this development process, in their thinking process, in their production process, if you want to put it as crudely as that, the outputs tend to be much better. They resonate much better with students, whatever it is, new assessment, new modules that they're putting together, or indeed new employment or employability experiences. So I guess I can't speak highly enough of just how much we value students' involvement, students' partnership with academics.
Ian, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, a very similar experience. I think, first of all, I'd just like to say on terms of formative as well, that actually one of the big shifts for me, I think, is the way in which lectures have become much more useful in terms of that formative knowledge development, as we've moved from kind of the lecture being available recorded after it's been delivered to having them all up front recorded, and that then has given much more time for kind of interactive learning in the classroom. But for me, where the collaboration with the students has come in has been around that facilitation of greater working between me and the students as to design what goes on in the classroom, and also the way in which they collaborate with each other much more effectively now, using tools that I think they were a bit shy of before, sharing files, for example. I get far less complaint now about group work than you used to do, because students have been better facilitated to keep in touch with each other outside of the classroom. I mean, for me, a big change has been the way in which, because there's less of me lecturing to them in the class now. I mean, we didn't do much of that before anyway. It was always quite interactive, but pretty much driven now entirely by discursive learning. I've become really a partner with those students in their presentation teams, and I can set up those teams with them. I can check that the engagement's there. They can share their materials. They can discuss with me what's going to happen in that class under the broad theme. So their ownership over the content is much greater than it was even before. So it's an evolution of a model I had anyway, but I think the pandemic, working remotely with students, required me to put an extra infrastructure in around that digitally, which has enhanced that and has made it a permanent feature of how I deliver that module. And also, similarly, we had a conference module which we did through Teams. We did the teaching through Teams, we did the small group work through Teams, and ultimately delivered the conference through Teams as well. And again, that facilitated more opportunities for students to keep in touch with us and with each other, and to get our formative feedback on the development of the conference paper, because the module involves small groups of students collaboratively researching and writing a paper that they deliver to a live conference at the end of the academic year. So again, it was the way in which it's promoting that greater interaction between the students themselves and also our participation as the teaching team.
Yeah, and of course that will be really useful, wouldn't it, for building that sense of community as well, which is so easy to lose online, I think. I'm really mindful that I have asked people to put questions in the chat, and I want to really make sure that there's some involvement and some sort of talking with our audience. And so there's a couple of questions that I might bring in now. The first one is from Ola Gardner, nice surname, and it's about how, and I think it's a really good question, about how we differentiate learning activities from formative assessments. You know, sometimes in our minds they're separate things when we go about designing our learning and teaching. Is learning activity with feedback a form of formative assessment? So that's the question. And I know what my view is, but I'd be really interested to hear what you all think. I can see some nodding and some smiles. Kevin, can I start with you?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question, actually, because I think we've always tried to espouse a view that formative assessment is part of the learning process. So obviously, whenever a student undertakes a piece of formative assessment, it provides an outlet for feedback. And feedback is an actual, essential ingredient in learning. Without feedback, it's exceptionally difficult to learn anything well, and particularly to learn it deeply. So the formative assessments just become an extension of those learning and teaching activities. Sometimes we call them checks for understanding or knowledge checks, but effectively what we are doing is providing some sort of evaluative activity that checks where that student is at in relation to the learning outcomes for the session, for the module, or even for the wider program, given the context. So yes, we would never espouse an approach that divorces formative assessment from learning and teaching activities.
Yeah, I don't think, has anyone got anything to add? I think that's a brilliant answer. No.
I could just add, I think it's also part about, that question often we get in student surveys about the value and the quality of and timing of feedback. And I think it's how we flag to students through both the learning activities and some of these more formalized formative assessments that they are getting that feedback right the way through. And feedback isn't just the comment on the summative assignment.
That's a really important point, isn't it? Because it can really easily be lost, and we spend quite a lot of time in those discussions and those conversations, and there's a lot of feedback and content there which we have to kind of hold a big sign up and make sure students know about. Lucian?
Just a very brief addition. I will go as far as to say that everything we do hopefully contributes to the learning that the student undertakes at university. And I hope colleagues understand the concept of assessment. Colleagues and everyone attending the session understands the concept of assessment for learning. So assessment, it's not an end in itself. It's not the point. Of course, the whole point of assessment and all that is to provide some assurance to the students and of course to themselves that they have met particular learning outcomes. So everything is a learning experience, and it's learning about sometimes perhaps a technical subject, but also learning about the students themselves, learning about their learning, how they become the more effective learners, the more effective lifelong learners, which, as the professionals that they're going to be turned into when they finish their studies, learning will never stop for them, and how they can maximize those learning opportunities for themselves. So assessment is never a goal in itself.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you for the question. I think that stimulated some really good discussion. The next question is from Ragshami Chuhan. I'm really sorry, I should have said that better. And it's directed at Kevin, but I also wonder if Andrew and Alan might have a perspective on this as well. Are there tools that can directly help creators validate the quality of instructional design of their videos? It might be useful for instructors who create videos for interactive flipped classrooms. So I think really just how do we know that our videos are of high quality and are doing what we think they're doing?
Well, from our perspective, it's very much about a process of internal verification is what we call it. So going back to one of the earlier questions around how do we get students involved in sort of the process of course design, curriculum design, we have a methodology where we get students involved in course design along with a group of other stakeholders, where they're actually providing a role which is about reviewing the learning and teaching activities that are created, reviewing the resources and materials that are created, including anything that's asynchronous, so anything that's a video, podcast, anything like that. to make sure that it is of the required quality. Because what has tended to happen in the past is that we create sort of courses, put them out there without much by way of review or internal verification, and then take all that feedback once the term has started and start tweaking things as we go. I mean, that's not to say we don't tweak things as we go, because we're always in a continuous improvement mindset. But we feel that the finished product is a lot better if that process of review involves students as well as peers. So, course teams actually reviewing their own resources, their own approaches to learning and teaching, even their own assessments as well, both formative and summative, so that we can kind of hit the ground running when those things are launched. I hope that answered the question.
I think it's a brilliant way of bringing student partnership working and the question of quality assurance together. It was really nice to hear that. I don't know, Andrew or Alan, do you have anything you'd like to sort of comment on? Andrew first.
I think Kevin probably summed it up. It's not about tools, it's about processes and reviews to validate the instructional design. I think the medium, be it video or whatever, is almost to some degree irrelevant. It's if the design's correct, then and constantly reviewed, then it should do what it's needing to do.
Great, thank you. Alan, anything to add?
No, I echo the comments from Andrew and Kevin, as in the medium, as Andrew says, it's almost immaterial in that respect, but yeah, some form of review process, certainly must be added there. I'm more, I suppose, in tune. It's not an area of my specialism. I'd be more in tune. I see there's a question, I think, from Mark there around assessments, gamification, etc. And that's really my theme, our theme effectively with student polling, I suppose, Claire, in that respect. When we have I think we have around 35, 40 universities using Vevox institution-wide, and the feedback continues. There's no downside to adding gamification in that respect, whether it is individual students or team-based learning, and that project work that has been mentioned as well by Ian there. Actually bringing them in as a team or individuals on the gamification side. The just Generation X, craves that kind of almost competitive type streak. They appreciate it. They want to be involved. They want to be engaged in it. So something like having a leaderboard effectively is and obviously it gives feedback on a per question basis as well, is all good, and it makes it memorable. I think we often forget the different types of learners. I'm a visual learner myself. Actually seeing like an image in a heat map or touch map, polling, they remember that. Not only do they remember the learning thing, but they more importantly, they remember if they were correct or incorrect on that image-based question. So building that out with different question types, of course, and into the gamification side, pulling that into a leaderboard, whether they get a gold, silver, bronze medal or no confetti at all, it's all good in that respect, Claire. I think competitive nature of students builds into that gamification as a positive experience every time.
Yeah, and this is one of the areas that I'm really interested in as well. We've just published a gamification for student engagement framework, and what we've really been thinking about, and hopefully what we'll follow up with, is how important gamification is for designing learning. Actually, sometimes the gamification itself isn't necessarily that important. It's the fact that you've really thought about how you're going to do it, where the feedback is going to come from, how the students are going to be engaging with your learning. And so sometimes actually the design aspect of gamification is really, really important. And there are a couple of really useful game elements in terms of formative assessment that we've come across. A couple particularly that seem to support engagement with formative assessment, because remember, formative assessment isn't assessed, or isn't summative. There's not necessarily a number or anything attached to it. So quite a lot of it is about making sure that students have some social interaction. That seems to be something that they really value from gamified platforms, but also that they have freedom to fail. And we found that has quite a powerful effect as well in terms of engagement with gamified platforms. Kevin.
Thanks, Claire. I just wanted to really sort of reiterate that point, because I think it's exceptionally important. I mean, from the time when we are children, one of the most powerful influences on how we learn is through play. So we learn things through playing. We generate very creative and innovative solutions to problems through play, and that's what we want our students effectively to be able to do through their university experience. The other thing that play does for us is it's exceptionally engaging. People aren't generally bored when they're playing. They're having a good time, and it supports that engagement piece. So I think play and the gamification of both formative and summative assessments is something that, really is, has huge potential. I mean, part of that potential, I think, has been realized, but I think we've probably only scratched the surface, really. I think probably, in the future, a lot more could potentially be done in relation to those things. And I think they are certainly the way forward. So again, I think it was a really great question.
And playful learning is a big movement as well, which is separate from this, but very powerful, and has shown some really interesting effects on student engagement, student learning, their environment, and their experience. Ian, I know that you wanted to contribute here.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also about how you have that as an engaging way of working outside of the classroom as well, because I think that then the students bring that interactivity and confidence into the classroom experiences. And I think a lot of what we've seen with the technology over the past couple of years is how it's able to expand the classroom into those informal spaces outside of the physical classroom, whether that's when the students are all in their own homes or whether it's working in different parts of the campus as well. And I suppose the other key thing for me around the formative assessment is how it's kind of building some of those digital skills, competencies that then can translate into different types of summative assessment as well, as we've moved away from kind of the essay exam-based kind of approach to have students writing to different lengths in different formats to different audiences. And in particular, I think what that's meant is even students in perhaps what are seen as the more traditional subjects are often now producing outputs from their degree programs, which are quite public facing. So not just the kind of conferences that I've mentioned before, but blogging, website design, online exhibitions, all those kind of things, which also give those students now a portfolio of skills which they can demonstrate to employers that I think show a degree of creativity and adaptability that perhaps wasn't always assumed to be there in some of those areas previously. And I think that's been really key as well.
Great, thank you. So I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left. So if you're sitting in the audience and you have a burning question, now's the time to pop it up in the Q&A box. But I'm just going to ask for your closing comments, and if there's anything else that you think we need to discuss in terms of student engagement that we haven't already covered. So I think I'll just go around the room if that's okay, and start with Lucian.
Thank you, Claire. All I will say to this is that nothing is ever static. So everything we've discussed here today, including student engagement, is a very dynamic process. So the expectations of one cohort of students, I find, does not necessarily match the expectations of the next year's cohort of students, or indeed the expectations of students in a different course. So for me, that's really important. Context is very important here.
Okay, Ian?
Yeah, I think for me, what's come out of the past 18 months or so is that connectivity outside of the classroom and building that sense of the learning community. I mean, that matters to me both from the point of view of how we look to build that in a stronger way for those students who are entirely online, but also I think it helps students who perhaps we think of the full-time campus student, don't we, as someone who's always on campus, but actually they're not. They're often commuter students. They're often balancing kind of work with a study in the way in which I think we've been able to be more flexible about how we connect with those students for one-to-one tutorials, for personal academic tutoring, but also pulling students together in groups working on tasks outside of the classroom has just been much more formalized now and better facilitated than that used to be the case. And I think that's something we really need to make sure we retain in future design. And that links back to also, I think, Claire, what you were saying before about where the students fit into designing that learning experience as well.
Great. And Andrew, any thoughts for the future?
I think I was just going to make a comment more about the student experience and kind of tap into a discussion we had before we came online about obviously we talk about Generation Z and how we think that today's students are tech savvy, and they are to some degree, but only in the tech and the apps that they want to be or need to be. And yet our duty, our role is to educate them in digital skills. I think digital skills is a big problem because they're coming and they know how to navigate Facebook and the like, but they don't know the fundamentals of how to use Office packages, and these are the skills that they need to demonstrate for the workplace. So yeah, I think digital skills is a big element of that student experience going forward.
Fantastic, yeah. And Alan?
Yeah, just to echo Andrew and Ian's comments there from earlier, Claire, I think, how do we learn to rethink our interactions with this new generation Z? And for me, that's really quite simple. Co-creation is key. In simple terms, you want to involve the students in redesigning your services, to meet their needs. And that's quite often forgotten in the respect that, it's front-ended by learning technologists at university level and ourselves, and design a product for them rather than actively listening to them.
There's a great point from Anne Norcuff in the chat as well, which is we need to meet students halfway. We maybe need to do a bit of learning from them as well, because we're not, well, I'm definitely not Gen Z or Alpha or whatever comes next. And then finally, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think my kind of summing up would be really that, the more diverse a community of learners is, the greater the level of learner variability there will be among them. So they will have different needs, different preferences, they will face different barriers and challenges. And the more we can anticipate those things, the better we're able to engage them effectively. Digital skills that I think both Andrew and Alan mentioned are critical, because you'll get some students with quite highly developed digital skills in the classroom and others with very little. And obviously that is a source of variability. It's a potential barrier to those learners that can't do it particularly well. So the more we know about our learners and the more we're able to anticipate and make those adjustments, then the better we will be able to engage them, keep them motivated and keep them at it effectively, which is obviously a big part of our role.
Brilliant. I think that's an excellent place to leave this discussion. So thank you everybody for your participation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else did too. Bye.